All right, welcome class. I'm going to try to make this video quicker. All right, so we're going to do Roman literature, and I wanted to move through the Roman literature. It's great stuff, but I just want to move on to the Nordic and Germanic stuff. So let's go into the Aeneid. The Aeneid is what we're going to go over today, and there's a little bit of setup for why this was created. So there's two basic things to come away with for this story for later. One is the author Virgil. Virgil is a poet, and he's going to come up later in some other texts. Um, Also, is the concept that the Romans don't really like the Greeks. It's kind of complicated. Some of the stuff they like, but they don't like them too much. So there's some insult there. So those two concepts are going to come up in another story to come later. For Rome, what we basically need to know by this time that the Aeneid is being written is wars have been going on. Most of Carthage, Greek states have been conquered, and we moved from a republic to an empire. And Augustus, the first emperor, he commissions Virgil to write the Aeneid. So, being that the emperor wants you to write this, he basically wants something that's grand, and that's what Virgil goes and gives him. He goes and takes a lot from Homer's The Iliad and the Odyssey and romanizes some of the concepts a little bit, adds on to it, but most of it's very nostalgic. And the main point of the Aeneid overall is there's a prophecy, and Aeneas will go and he will give birth to a new nation, a new country after the fall of Troy, and that will be Rome. So it becomes very nostalgic for like how great Rome is and will become this like destined wonderful place. And that's the main point that Aeneid really was written, and Virgil knew this, so that's why he wrote it like he does. Here we can see by the death of Augustus what they had conquered. Virgil originally is from Gaul, and that region is kind of where France is today, but they had a little bit more region back then. And if you look over here on the right side, you can see the Aegean Sea. And the right side, that's where Troy was. And to the left of the Aegean Sea is where the Greeks are. And if we keep going left of the Greeks, we have Italy and Rome. And that's where the story will eventually end over there. So just some things to keep in mind is the Romans had very similar in their pantheon, but they changed the names a lot. So some of the names I will use the Roman name in it, and other ones I will just use the Greek one for some of their terminology because it's a little easier coming from the Iliad and then coming into this. It feels like you have to learn a whole new diction. So I will use some of the Greek ones, but they use a lot of the same gods. The big one here is Athena. Athena plays a crucial role. Let's go ahead and scroll down through the background. It's a great read, some of the things in here, but for what we need, we can move through that. A couple things about Virgil. He Publius Virgilius Maro is his original name. He just kind of goes by Virgil, but he was a great poet and he was well liked. Even from a young age, he seemed to get on pretty well and made a name for himself. The Aeneid is probably his most well-known work, just because it was well liked at the time, and it's something that scribes and people would continue to write copies, and that's how that kind of gets translated. And later we'll see another work by an Italian, who of course is, Rome is in Italy. So he likes Virgil quite a lot. So he's going to really dig all of this. The other thing to note about the Aeneid is that it will kind of depict the Greeks not as heroic as they were in the Iliad. The other thing that is important is this term. If you see at the top here, Virgil begins his story as Homer does in the middle of the action. This is known as "in res," and that's just a Latin term that basically means in the middle of. So "in res" is just something that when your story begins, it's like a war scene, like out of Saving Private Ryan. They start on the beaches of Normandy and they just get into the action. The downside can be, though, is you haven't established your characters or place very well, so it's not something you necessarily need to do. But for the Aeneid, most of the Romans are familiar with Homer's work. The Grecian stories became popular. So when he goes to the Iliad and the Odyssey and he's referring to these things, they're fairly well known, so he can just kind of jump into the action of it. So the characters here, there's just a few worth noting. One is Priam. He's the king of Troy, and Troy falls. Next is Ulysses. Ulysses is the Roman name for Odysseus. So they refer to Odysseus quite a few times, not in a positive light, and they just call him Ulysses. And as far as gods go, Minerva and Pallas is other names for Athena, and Athena is a goddess of war and wisdom. So she will play a role in how the events sort of play out in the texture there. So again, Augustus commissioned this, so it has a lot of Roman going in. So I'm going to read parts of it. First, let's go ahead and read what your homework's going to be so that we can see what we're looking for. So if we scroll down here, page 504, the questions 1, 2, and 3. Questions 1. Why do some of the Trojans fear the wooden horse? So we're going to talk about the Trojan horse, as it's called now. B. How do the Trojans feel about the horse at the end of Cynon's performance? So Cynon is a character in this portion of the Aeneid, and we're going to see who he is and what role he plays, and a little bit why. Question 2, who does Cian say he is, and what reasons does he give for running away from the Greeks? So that's going to be important. And 3, think about how Cian's first appearance on stage, nonverbal stage business accompanies his words. So we'll see what his manner of speech is and what's important to the story. Also, Virgil calls attention to his acting, and calls out his very theatrical play. So when we get to Cian, you'll see how theatrical he can be. So let's go back down. All right, so I'll read some of these things. Notice this is book 2. So what's happening is Aeneid or Aeneas is retelling the story of how the Troy fell to a queen, and he's in Carthage. And so he's saying this is what happened, by the way, after the fall of Troy. Because remember, in the Iliad, the story ends with the death of Hector and the mourning of it, and that was it. But this is continuing a little bit after that and shows the fall of Troy in a much more, sort of a different light. So book 1 of the Aeneid begins. I sing of warfare and a man of war. That man at war is the Trojan prince Aeneas, who embodies the Roman ideals of devotion to duty. As he performs his mission to found the Roman people, he and his men set sail from Troy, only to encounter a series of adversaries along their way to Italy. So I'll show at the very end, but you can see that he starts off at Troy, and like a lot of the stories of the time, he gets caught through the ocean. Events happen very much like the Odyssey, and eventually he'll make his way to what Rome becomes and establishes Rome. And of course, this is a work of fiction, just to establish that Rome is awesome. So he's going to recount this tale. Line 3. Sorrow too deep to tell, your majesty. You order me to feel and tell once more how the Danes leveled in the dust. So the Danaans is a term for Greeks. So that's one of the terms. I'm just going to refer to them as the Greeks so we know like who we're talking about. So I'll read line 5 again. How did the Greeks leveled in the dust? The splendor of our mourned forever kingdom, heartbreaking things I saw with my own eyes, and I was myself a part of. Who could tell them? Even the Myrmidons and the Delphinians, and oh, the ruffians of Ulysses without tears. Now too the night is well along, with dewfall out of heaven and setting stars way down our heads towards sleep. So he's again talking about the fall of Troy and sort of mournful for how great the kingdom was and sad for the events that follow. Um, We'll skip down a little bit to line 18. Knowing their strength broken in warfare, turned back by fate, and years so many years. Keep in mind, the Iliad took place over many years. That was the war was a long fought war. Line 20. Already slipped away. The Greeks' captains, by the divine handicraft of Pallas, built a horse of timber, tall as a hill, and sheathed its ribs with planking of cut pine. This they gave out to be an offering for a safe return by sea, and the word went around by all on the sly. They shut inside a company chosen from their picked soldiery by lot, crowding the vaulted caverns in the dark, the horse's belly, with men fully armed. So even at the beginning of the story, the commonly called Trojan horse, it already sets up that the Greeks have left the horse and they are pretending as if they've left the shores and giving up on the war, but they've actually just moved the boats out of view away from the city. And inside the horse is, a select amount of soldiers that are to infiltrate the city. So there's a reason why they expect the Trojans to take this horse into the city as we get through it. But just know that the story already starts up what's to become of it. And I think one of the main reasons why the Trojan horse is even used is again that sort of backhanded comment on the Greeks, that the Romans look at the Greeks as like not so strong, so they have to use these underhanded tactics, right? That they can't just storm the gates and actually take Troy. No, they have to do it this way. So you get a little bit of that from the Roman perspective. And then line 52, this trick of the Greeks, a gift no one can trust, or cut it open, search the hollow belly. So this idea, this concept of beware gifts from the Greeks, because they are something to not be trusted. There's actually a famous Latin expression from this, and it comes from the Aeneid. So I'm going to actually show you a clip. This is from the 1992 movie The Rock, and in it you have some prisoners. And let's skip to right here. So we have Nicolas Cage, and he's the young protagonist, and he's trying to convince the character of Sean Connery that to go to Alcatraz and help him do these things because he knows the way. And of course, they don't tell him the whole story of the danger involved. Well, he knows, Sean Connery, that the FBI is suddenly just breaking him out of prison for 30 years, suddenly wanting something and offering him a plea bargain. He knows this is not something to be trusted. So here is the clip.
Makes you a free man, provided you cooperate. So if you'll just sign where it says
Signature.
that's yes, signature.
Temiodaneus Dona Forentus.
I fear the Greeks, even when they bring gifts.
An educated man. That rules out.
So I just wanted to show this clip because if you've ever seen another story or another book that had used such an expression, this is where they get it. They get it from the Aeneid. This is beware the Greeks when they bring gifts, because it's not to be trusted, which sets up the narrative as we move throughout the pages. I'll go through this more quickly. When the Trojans come to the horse, their initial reaction is not to trust it. They're just like, why would we take this in? It's from the Greeks. They cannot be trusted. At the top, 58. And still far off cried out, "Oh, my poor people, men of Troy, what madness has come over you? Can you believe the enemy truly gone? A gift from the Greeks, and no ruse? Is that Ulysses' way, as you have known him? Achilleans must be hiding in this timber, or is built to butt against our walls. Peer over them into our horses, pelt the city with the sky. Some crookedness in this thing. Have no faith in the horse. Whatever it is, even when Greeks bring gifts, I fear them, gifts and all." So they already suspected from the beginning and should have followed through on that. But as we're going to scroll down here, we're going to meet a character. This is Cian, or Cyan, but I think it's Cian. If we come up to, let's go to line 98. The whimpering speech brought us by short. We felt a twingle from him. Let him speak up. We said, "Tell us where he was born, and what news he brought. What could he hope for a prisoner, taking this time slow to discard his fright?" He said, "I'll tell you the whole truth, my lord, no matter what may come of it. Argue of I am birth, and will not say I am not. That first of all, fortune has made a derelict of Sianan, by the which won't make an empty liar of him too." And um, he already sets up this the kind of over dramatic um, kind of a presence. So he's starting to plead with them. He's a prisoner of the Greek from the Greek side, and he's pleading with the Trojans. Drop down to line 119. Then, by the guile and envy of Ulysses, nothing unheard of there, he left this world, and I live on, but under a cloud, in sorrow, raging for my blameless friend's downfall. Demented too, I could not hold my peace, but said if I had luck, if I won through, and he continues to go on. So he sets up this concept, and he's pleading with them, and he's telling a story that the Greeks were horrible to him. He was against the war, and he was looking for a way to flee. And he goes on talking about like how terrible the Greeks are. Oh, they just abused him. They did horrible things to him. They just treated him terribly. And of course, the Trojans they're appealing to this because they're like, oh yes, the Greeks are terrible. So it's starting to appeal to them why they may trust this young lad. And if we keep scrolling down, let's see, line 192. Whoever you may be, the Greeks are gone. Forget them from now on. You shall be ours, and answer me these questions. Who put this huge thing up, this horse? Who designed it? What do we want with it? And is it religious or means of war? Um, So one of the things being asked here is a transition from, hey, we should look for the Greeks, we don't trust them, to, okay, forget about them for now. What do we do with this horse? Is it religious in nature? And this is where things start to turn. So one of the Trojans is asking this, by the way. And then Cian turns around, and this is the big part revealing his character at line 198. These were his questions. Then the captive, trained in trickery in the stagecraft of Achaea, lifted his hands unfeathered to the stars, eternal fires of heaven. He began, powers inviolable, I swear by thee, as the altars and blaspheming swords I got away from the gods' white bands. I wore on a chosen for sacrifice. This is justice. I am justified. So he sets up a concept that A, this Trojan horse is a gift to the gods as a blessing for the Greeks to have a safe passage, and that it was maybe to be used for sacrifice, and that somehow maybe he was going to be used for sacrifice, which is just trickery. He pleading with them, and unfortunately, this does come around on them. He of course invokes Ulysses and how terrible Odysseus was, and the Trojans like, yeah, oh, yeah, terrible guy. Another point of fact is that important to the story is there was a statue of Athena within Troy, and the Greeks took this statue, and it was believed to be a great blessing for Troy. So, having this blessing gone, and then having this horse that is also dedicated to Athena, sort of marks a worry within the Trojans. Because one, you don't want to just destroy the horse, even if you think it's trickery, because what if you upset the gods, right? That could be a lot worse. Also, they're missing their own blessing. And if this statue is indeed a manner of sacrifice or dedicated to Athena, and she is a goddess of wisdom and war, you kind of want that on your side. So, through his arguments and just pleading and just over the top, chewing the scene, as it were, Sanon is able to convince the Trojans that this horse is something that will bring them blessing, right? Ironic. And so they eventually come around. So when we get to the end of our story, this is how it is 259. This fraud, obscene, and he accomplished lying, won us over a tall tale, fake tears, he captured us with whom, and it goes on to explain how Troy fell. Aeneas was being the protagonist of the Aeneid. He was in Troy at the time. It fell. The soldiers came out of the horse, of course. They took the city. He blames Helen of Troy, who was honestly just captured in the Iliad. So she didn't. I mean, she didn't plan or try to bring this about. And there's a lot of God intervention in all this too. And eventually, it's sad. But Aeneas takes some troops and some people as he can, and he flees. And he's given the opportunity later to eventually. And here's the sacking of Troy. Eventually, he will found Rome. But one of the things he has to do, let me go after the questions. So this is Aeneas and where he goes. So if you look on the right side, he starts off at Troy and he wanders around the Aegean Sea. There's many islands. He encounters all these different events and things happen. The Temple of Minerva, which is Athena. Eventually, he comes to Carthage over here on the way left, which is in Africa, but very close to Italy. And at first, he begins the story. Book two comes from there. And one of the gods is basically trying to keep him there and make him fall in love with the queen, whose husband was killed, and other plot, plot, plot. And so at first, it's kind of considered, but he has to follow through on the prophecy and breaks her heart, and a lot of drama happened. But Aeneas eventually does make his way back to Italy and then Latium, which eventually is the foundation for the Roman civilization. So that is the Aeneid and why it's important. Again, two aspects about this is remember Virgil, who wrote it. He's going to come up. And remember the Romans don't like the Greeks, also going to be a thing that comes up. So go ahead and answer the three questions. And they deal with Sinon and just where he's coming from on this and his treachery and how he's just over the top and trying to convince them. But again, remember, he is a Greek. So, that's the interpretation you get with that. So that is my lecture. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Let me know if you have any questions.